Good morning. I'm Aaron Howard, and I'm the servant of God and minister for the church in Tennessee Ministries, or the church INTN. That is the title, whether it be my Gmail account, Yahoo, or any other platform. So thank you for joining, audience. And when last we spoke, we were on the subject of the church, which is what the believers are as a collective group separate from society, separate from all other religious factions or denominations that are other than Christian denominations. And give me 1 second while I set my timer. All right. And so when we talked last week, we spoke about the word church as just the term itself. And so I went in depth in the origin and history of the word and how it's associated with believers. Also, I went into why God led me to keep in line and conforming with the scriptures. And so that's why the name of this ministry is called The Church, because that's what it's always been called. And so now we're going to get a little bit more in depth into the lesson so we can have a full understanding of who we are and what we've been called to do in this world and how we've been called to behave and conduct ourselves. So we're going to go to, I'm going to erase this, we're going to start getting into the scriptures, more into the scriptures rather. And we're going to go to over to 1 Corinthians we're going to go first. I'm going to start here. Let me make sure that can be seen. All right. Church. We're going to go to 1 Corinthians 3rd chapter. All right. The two verses in this chapter, not the whole chapter, but at least for 17 verses. The two verses in this chapter is going to be 3:9 and 17. All right. So in 3:9, Paul says that he's talking to the Corinthian church. The Corinthian church was a predominantly Gentile church with Jews sprinkled in with them. And so in 1 Corinthians 9, it says that we are laborers together with God for we are laborers together with God. We are God's husbandry and we are God's building. And 1 Corinthians 3:17, it says, know ye not that you are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwelleth in you. Excuse me. Actually, we're going to go through 16 and 17. Let me stop for a second. Through 16 through 17. And it says, know ye not that you are the temple of God, and the Spirit of God dwelleth in you. If any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy. And so what we want to do is, in order to make sure we understand these verses, some verses you're going to see in scripture will be standalone verses, meaning that they can be understood to some degree without the circumstances involved or the background. But a lot of scriptures, you want to make sure you go back to get context, meaning with, and then the text. All right, so with the text, we want to get the surrounding circumstances and background. Well, why do you want to get that? Because without the surrounding circumstances, without the background, then you may not get the understanding of the verse clearly. You may not get the accuracy of the verse. And why is it important to have accuracy? Because the scriptures are for instructions, and the instructions are the wisdom given by God to navigate this to navigate this wilderness called life. Instructions are extremely important. And so that's why you want context, because you want accuracy. You want accuracy because your life depends on it. Okay? So without the circumstances, what happens is you get part of the story. And a lot of times in life, that's what happens when someone comes in on the back end of a story, and then they'll tell you something like, why don't you just quit meddling? You don't even know what's going on. So we want to know what's going on. And that's why we want to go through the context. So we're going to try to do this in brevity. We're going to try to be brief. We're going through this context. We're going through the rest of the verses. So in verse 1 of 1 Corinthians, I'm not going to really read it, but Paul talks about how he could not talk to them as spiritually mature adults or spiritually mature believers, but he had to talk to them as babes in Christ. He had to feed them with milk and not meat. When you have little babies, when you have children, you can't give them a steak. You have to give them milk because their body cannot digest those types of foods. So what Paul was saying here is, because you guys have shown yourselves to be still as children, I have to talk with you and I have to have dialogue with you along those lines. And then as he keeps going, he says he's fed them with milk, which is something he alludes to also in Hebrews 5:12. He says the same thing. He said he had to teach them the elementary things of Christ. Elementary meaning simple or almost like grade school. In other words, when we're talking about first, second, third grade, or first grade rather, we're talking about 1 + 1 = 2, 2 + 2 = 4. All right. Hold on for a second. I got the grandson over here. Oh, I got my wife at the door peeking in. All right. So, where was I? All right. So when we're talking about elementary, and then as you get older, you get more and more understanding. So now we go to multiplication. 8 times 8 is 64. 4 times 4 is 16. 4 times 3 is 12. So on and so forth. And then you go on to algebra, trigonometry. And so that's what Paul is talking about here. He can't go on to the meatier things because they're still behaving like children. And so he has to speak to them as unto babes. All right. So then you go through, and he goes on to tell them that the reason why he has to talk to them this way is because he's hearing about divisions and strifes and contentions within the church. Why is there divisions? And he said, and the reason why there's divisions within the church is because what they're doing is they're creating what some might term, in the political world, they call it partisanship. And partisanship is where an individual or group adheres to a person, or group joins an individual, joins a person because of personal bias or based on emotions. And this was happening so much so within the church that it was causing divisions, and the divisions started to become a reason for contention and strife within the church. And so that's what was happening. That's what Paul was addressing. And he goes on to say, He said, who is Paul? Because the divisions were centered around essentially three people, because he also discusses this in the first chapter of Corinthians, and I think maybe in the fourth chapter of Corinthians. So what he says, who is Paul? Who is Apollos? Who is Cephas? Cephas was Peter. Who are these people that you're creating these contentions about? But we're no more than just ministers here to serve God for the purpose of the church. He says we're nobody. So he goes on, and then he describes, he uses agricultural terminology, or terminology we use concerning farming. He said, who is Paul? He says, one watereth, one planteth, the other watereth, but God gives the increase. Since God is giving the increase, the one that watered is nothing, the one that planted is nothing, but God that gives the increase. So what's happening is you're thinking, or the church was thinking of these teachers more highly than they ought to have. And in a church setting, we have to be careful about that. We have to guard against that, where we think of a man more highly than we ought to, that we glorify man above where he should be glorified. So he goes on, he says, neither is he that planteth anything, he that watereth, but God that giveth the increase. He that planteth and watereth are one, and every man shall receive his own reward according to his own. Then when we go to verse 9, he says, for we are laborers together with God. Ye are God's husbandry, ye are God's building. Instead of this Corinthian church looking at themselves as being one. Now don't get me wrong, you're going to need positions in the church or in a fellowship. Why? Because their gift determines and dictates how they are to function within the fellowship and how that gift can best serve the whole. So that's why you have some teachers, that's why you have had some apostles, that's why you had some prophets, had some apostles. That's why. Because their gifts determine that that's what they would be best suited to serve the building, which is the church. So he says, we are all one. We're laborers together with God. We're not individuals. It's not just me, Paul, and Apollos, who happened to be eloquent of speech, and Cephas or Peter, who was the first to preach to the Gentiles. So we're not divided. Christ is not divided. We're all one. And this is what he's trying to get across to an infant church, so they'll understand that they have to move as one, move on one accord, all think the same things, all behave and think like Christ. He says, for we are laborers together with God. Ye are God's husbandry. When we're talking about being a husbandman, we're talking about cultivating the land. That's what a husbandman is. He is a cultivator of the land. And what is the land? The land is actually a metaphorical term for the church. And so all of the individuals that comprise the church is supposed to help in cultivating each other. And what do I mean by cultivating? We're supposed to be enriching each other's lives. We're supposed to be edifying each other, fortifying each other, strengthening each other, comforting one another in this stressful time that we're living in right now. So he says that we are God's husbandry, we are God's building. Now there's a reason he's saying that. We are God's building. Building. The word oikodomē. And that's what it is. Oikodomē is a building. It's oikodomē. Oikodomē is an architecture, a structure, a building that has been put together. So when he says this, right, then Paul says, according to the grace of God that has been given unto me, as a wise master builder. Now, the word master builder, master, is the word architecton. And that is a chief constructor or an architect. What is an architect? Well, an architect is an individual that's hired to draw out in great detail the diagrams and plans of another. He may not be able to draw it out, or he may be able to and does not have the time. So that's what an architect is. Someone that's being handed plans to draw out. In fact, it makes me think of the plans for the ark. Moses was the architect. God was the guy that told Moses how he was to design the ark. All right? So, Paul says that the grace that's been given unto him as a wise master builder, an architect, a great architect under the guise and power of God. All right? As a wise master builder, he says he has laid the foundation and another buildeth thereon. But let every man take heed how he builds up on this foundation, because, and in the next verse he says, because no other foundation can a man lay except that which was laid, Jesus Christ. There's no other foundation that can be laid. None. What is a foundation? The foundation is the substructure. I'm going to try to draw this out. If this is the ground, right here, you want to dig until you find the rock. And once you find the rock, this is where you start building. And you go up. And sometimes in a substructure, on this rock, they will put steel rods. The steel rods help to reinforce the whole. Because without a solid foundation, your building has no real fortification. With the proper foundation and substructure, it may give, it may wave, it may go back and forth, but it won't fall because it's founded on a solid foundation. And that's what Paul is saying, is that the church, the building which he had just previously called us, is founded on the foundation of Jesus Christ, and there is no other foundation that can be laid. And then this is spoken about. What foundation is that? This is spoken about in Matthew and in Luke. And we're going to go there right quick so we can see what he means by that. What does he mean by Jesus Christ as the foundation? I'm not going to go to Matthew, but I'm going to read Luke. Luke 6:48. Luke 6:48 to 49. This is the foundation that the church is built upon. Verse 47.